In this video, what I'm going to cover is how I get my swirls in my epoxy pours. And I'm going to use a cracker board or a cracker cheese board as an example of how I do this. I previously released a short that showed me doing it in real quick time, but it really didn't give the proper feel for what I was doing. So in this video, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how I swirl my Bushita brown color in this cracker board, and I'm trying to do it in real time so that you can see exactly what I'm looking at and what the epoxy looks like as I do the swirls. It really is a matter of touch and feel, but you can also get an idea of how long you can swirl depending on the epoxy you're using. I'm going to be using Moss LV epoxy in this example, and I'm going to be using the medium hardener, and that means I typically have somewhere between 45 minutes and an hour and a half where I can swirl before it sets up to the point where I can no longer swirl without creating bubbles or other problems with the epoxy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to enter in at the point where I'm just about ready to do my last swirl. So my technique is I typically start swirling or checking to see whether the swirls will have any impact with my tabletop epoxy about 15 to 20 minutes after I make the initial pour. And then depending on what that shows me, I will also come back about every 15 minutes and I'll do a small swirl and, if necessary, pop bubbles until I get to the point where I start feeling resistant and it's like starting to gel, and that if I do it anymore, I'm going to end up folding bubbles or other problems with the epoxy. And you also want to be careful you don't bake the epoxy by that time. When you start applying heat, you can apply too much heat and then you just create more problems for yourself. So in this video, what I'm going to do is try to show you my technique of how I use it, and hopefully it will help some of you. Now, one different thing is when I'm doing river pours, those don't harden for several hours. So it doesn't even do you any good to start trying to do swirls and river pours until, depending on the type you're using, somewhere between 5 and 10 hours into the curing process. You can do it if you feel like you want to, but it's really not going to impact because shortly after you swirl, it'll go back to its norm pattern. And remember that in deep pours, you got the convection flow of the epoxy, which is also causing its own swirl. So you may not think you're getting any swirling, but you do as the epoxy cures. But this video is going to focus on my thin layer multicolor type epoxy pours, which is typically about 1/8 of an inch, and I'm using bartop tabletop epoxy. With that, let's go ahead and get started, and we're going to come into the video just at the point where I'm getting ready to do my last swirl. And you will see what it looks like when I approach and then when I finish and see the results. Time to give it another swirl. You notice that I've added a food tin over it because I want to keep any sawdust or anything from the air getting on there as much as possible. So we'll go one more time and see how this swirl looks and if it's gelling yet. Been about 45 minutes to an hour into the process now. It is starting to gel a little bit now. So I'm being careful not to stir up too many bubbles. Let's see if we can get up close so you can see what I'm talking about. I'm not sure how close this will get, but if you look, you can see there's some resistance there. I want to be careful not to get too much. So I'm just barely moving it around here. Trying not to create any extra bubbles. With this surface tension the way it is now, this is probably going to be the last time that I can actually do swirls and feel comfortable without actually looping in more bubbles than I want. So I'm coming along the sides and I'm moving it out. You see how there's tension there? It's something you got to learn by feel when it's time to stop. And this is about the last time I'm going to want to attempt this. Okay, that'll be about the last set of swirls I put in there. Let it sit for a second, and then I'll pop it with pop the bubbles one more time and levelize it with the heat. So now we'll see how many of those swirls actually stick around, but I'm sure there'll be plenty, especially after I surface it. So this Moss LV epoxy cures up pretty quick. It's been about an hour since I poured, and so that is about how long I have to get the swirls in. Recover it with my net, and there we are. Well, that's a wrap on this swirl video. I hope it helped some of you. I tried to do it in real time so that you could get the way that I was doing the swirls and how I was taking it slowly. When you're at that last phase, just as it's gelling, make sure you don't make quick movements or fold your epoxy up to create air bubbles and other problems. Also, if you start to touch your epoxy and it starts to feel actually gummy or hard versus just a slight resistance, stop. Don't start trying to turn it, because it means it's cured too far and you'll just create a bigger mess than you want. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. Hopefully it'll help some of you that are wondering about how I get swirls and others get swirls. And if you liked what you saw, you know the standard routine. Give me a thumbs up, share, comment, and it always helps my channel if you do that. And if you want to see further videos on epoxy, lasers, CNCs, or 3D printing, make sure you subscribe to my videos and hit that all bell. With that, have a great day until we meet in this medium again.